Here. So welcome back to our post-coffee break session. This is loosely titled Next Steps, and it'll be sponsored and facilitated by myself, Skylie McAfee, and Steve Weisberg. And because it's the afternoon, and we know that we're coming into the station, I want to give you a little roadmap so you know that the end is in sight, and we do have a goal for this session, and that by the end of this meeting we'll have some real productivity and some solid things to look at. So I'm going to open the bidding with a session on perspectives, a few slides, a few comments, and my view is going to be that of a CCAN connected scientist. It's been a real privilege to work with this group. So I'm going to share with you some of the successes that I see, that I know you see as well, but some updatey things that maybe you don't know about that would be really neat to share. Then Steve is going to step in, and of course he was one of our initial sponsors at the very beginning, and he will definitely lead us more in the future. And this is kind of going to be good cop, bad cop, because I get to talk about all the great stuff we've done to remind us of all our successes, how far we've come in the last 2 years, and then Steve's going to get up here and bear down on us like a freight train in the night that says, you're not leaving this room until we have some recommendations and some things taken care of. So I get the fun part. And then we're going to turn over to some more from Steve about outcomes, things we need to do, things we want to do. And Skylie will share with us some of her perspectives. And I've loosely called these outcomes and outreach. So let's start with the perspective. So I'm really approaching this from what I see and things I want to share. And, you know, those of us who are at the first meeting, you know that we were really starting from scratch. Our colleagues in the hatcheries, the growers, and the fishers were seeing really serious deleterious emerging problems. And the scientists and the oceanographers on the other side were studying this emerging area of ocean acidification. We had people from agencies there who were very interested. And I think the summary here is that we have come so incredibly far. So I'm just going to highlight a few things for us as we go along. So first, assets. I love that word. I never use it. But when we first got together, there were very few sensors in the water. There were very few assets that we could call our own. And just to highlight one, because we have them with Alan and Sue, we have them at different locations, but a direct result of our last meeting was that Tessa Hill meets Terry, and they just deployed a sensor a couple weeks ago. They put out a SBE 19 and a Durafet, and away we go. So these things would not be happening if we were not together, and I think we should really remember that. And Francis has noted that one of the activities that we should be doing is maybe pulling together partners to really look at the resources more collectively. And we said this over and over again, and one of our successes is that we have been doing that, led by Jan Newton from one of the USA's, NANUS. I mean, we've come so far. Was this map available when we started, Jan? No. So this is a major product. And the other reason I'm doing this little presentation, it also does two things. It's an archival documentation for present funders and future funders of what this group has done, what work we have done and what we might pollinate in the future, where we're headed. And for people of my ilk, as Skylie noted, that when we begin to write proposals, there are broader impact places where in your proposal where you can say, this group has already done X and I want to contribute Y. So maybe, you know, in my next proposal I can ask for 3 or 4 sensors to go out to some critical CCAN hatchery or grower or wild fishery sites. And it won't just be pie in the sky, but I can get a letter of support from Jan. I can show a map of how this might play out. So this is actually incredibly significant. And Francis highlighted for us that there are sensors in the water that we could quickly partner with because some groups have already adopted the CCAN philosophy of co-locating sensors and biology studies together. I'll just use an example that I have from my backyard. In the Santa Barbara Channel, we've got the Omegas group, which is an NSF-funded collaboration that has the blue sensors from Oregon down to Santa Barbara. The Santa Barbara Coastal LTR has some sensors, and I think they've got 2 out now, and they'll soon have 5, 6, or 7 in the red. And then one of my grad students, Lydia Kapsenberg, received some funding from climate change-related competition from the National Park Service, and she deployed 2 sensors and soon 3 in the Channel Islands at sites that the National Park Services, and they're in. It's a very solid collaboration. We use their boats, and they want to be part of this network. So we have assets within our collective community that we can begin to add to in ways that we want to. But 2 years ago, no way, we didn't have this. Bruce Maggie and I and Francis came to that first meeting, and I don't even know if this proposal was a twinkle in our eye yet, that we really hadn't, we were thinking this would be good, but we hadn't done it. So we've come a far, far way. So Barton et al., 2012, say no more. This is direct productivity of a scientific variety that is incredibly meritorious. It almost broke Alan. No, but it's fabulous. This is really, really incredible, because now when I do write my proposals and I do ask for sensors to facilitate CCAN missions, I actually have a publication to put in there that is a piece of, well, shall we say, currency that a community that reviews science proposals really understands. So this is really, really helpful. So thank you very much. And 2 last comments that I think are incredibly important. One is for me personally, and the other is an update to you. Community. A couple things happened for me. I would be at work and my cell phone would ring, and I'd be around my students and postdocs and say, I've got to take it, it's Andrew. And he started to be called my gentleman caller. And I'd say, I got to run, and they'd say, oh, is it your gentleman caller again? And so I'd flash my phone and say, it is, Andrew Dixon. So I had the great pleasure of Andrew being one person that I worked with a lot. But there were times when I needed a lot of help. And I had the distinct privilege of serving for a group that wrote a chapter of the National Climate Assessment. So I was one of 6 lead authors and a couple convening authors. And at one point I needed help and I needed pictures. And I contacted members of our steering committee, and I needed it quickly. And so Sue Cudd ran around her hatchery with a camera, and Chris got me a picture of larvae. And the reason that I needed that was kind of surprising. So this is kind of a cool update item for us, is that during the discussions when we were convened, we were thinking about examples. The chapter was Oceans and Marine Resources. And we wanted examples of where climate change related or ocean change related issues would alter the resources of the US. And many of them came up, and I offered the situation that we have on the West Coast. And the committee thought it was great, and suddenly I had more homework, which meant that I had to write a box feature almost overnight. So it was wonderful that I had this group to turn to get photographs. Skylie helped me write a very articulate statement about our relationship to policy. And I can't share the text yet, but it's likely that this will appear in the 2013 release of the report, which is due out, I don't know, maybe this coming April, May, June, I'm not quite certain. But I don't know how big a deal this is going to be, but it will certainly elevate the conversation a little bit, I think. Stu can probably chime in here later. But I think this is, again, another thing that we can present to the Moore Foundation. This would not have happened had I not been involved with CCAN, because I wouldn't have thought even to mention this probably, and I wouldn't have had the resources to bring it to bear for this particular group. So this slide is just included for Diane so that she sort of has a laundry list of things that I think are really amazing, almost to use an NSF overused word, transformative, because these, we have come so far in the time that we've been working together. So just for a couple minutes, I wanted to invite anybody to add a couple things for Diane, because this will also be used when we report back to the Moore and for Andrew. But sometimes you're frustrated this group might not be moving as fast as you want. All groups are like that. So if you have something, especially Terry, Ian, Steve, our colleagues on the growing Fisher side, if you have something you want to add that's something, a success that we didn't have, that would be great. And think of it like therapy, like you're in couples therapy and you have to say something nice about the other person, and it's time to say, I think you make me feel, no.
We're going to know in a minute how Steve would behave.
Yeah.
That's right, here we go. We're going to find out. All right.
I have a question. Actually, this is something on chat from Joe Gilbertson, and it's a question for Andrew and others regarding continuous pH data precision and variance. Can we generate a coefficient of variance for Durafet or other sensor-derived pH data by using two sensors at the same place with discrete sampling to calibrate and evaluate accuracy? So that's a question that should fit wherever it's appropriate to answer.
Well, how about we let Andrew and Jan maybe handle that offline, and we'll proceed to our next activities. We love the question, and Andrew is just licking his chops to answer. He cannot wait, I can tell. So he will be dealing with that online. So I want to, in the interest of time, Jan?
Can I just say one thing? Sure. I really appreciate that you gave Nanu's attribution there, but I don't think it's appropriate. I think it really should be the West Coast IUS regional associations, because SCOOS and SENCOOS really are serving OA data, and it's you know, everybody's doing that. So Emilio and I gave you a lot of examples from Nanus, and certainly we've got some wonderful relationships from the shellfish growers that did definitely seed and hatch within the CCAN forum, but I feel really badly about that attribution there. And also, you know, I didn't do a lot of what you see. It's really Emilio and an amazing team, and ditto for SENCOOS and SCOOS.
Don't feel badly that you did such a great job, but we would definitely write this as an IUS kind of perspective. That was just a screenshot of yours, and I misspoke if I didn't include everybody. Certainly Live Washburn and others have been here. He just couldn't make this particular meeting, so that's something that we can capture and correct in the documents. Jonathan?
So is Omegas a group that should be part of CCAN? Are there two separate groups that are interested in the same sorts of things? How does that work together?
Well, so Omegas is a NSF-funded consortium of investigators, several of whom participate as members of CCAN. So Francis Chan, myself, Tessa Hill, and Bruce Mangy, Live Washburn. So there are quite a few of us. And I think the desire to conduct our project kind of occurred independently of CCAN, but as soon as it started to happen, we all now have connectivity. So I think, Francis, yesterday you described how you and Whiskey Creek may have interacted with various field data. So it's a different entity, but it's also an entity that has assets that could be useful to CCAN.
Just another point is our development of the algorithms for the Southern California current system was definitely a CCAN effort, because we all got together at CCAN meetings to make that work.
Excellent. So my final word on this, because I know we're all a little tired, but these kinds of developments are critical in terms of us going forward. So if you think of them, please send an email to Diane, Andrew, Skylie, Steve, and just note it. So Richard's example is perfect, something that I didn't think of, and we all have them, but it helps build sort of our outcomes list for our report back to our funders, which is critical. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve to lead us up to lunch with the next section.
So I have been married 36 years, and I've never been to couples therapy, and I don't know how I'd do in that. But
we want to hear from her.
Yeah. No, you don't. No, I don't want you to. Anyway, I think what the goal is my job is now to take you to, okay, there are a lot of things you have accomplished. What are the things you haven't accomplished, and what's the to-do list that we're going to walk out of here with? I think Jan did a very nice job of identifying kind of 6 generalities of things that we want to do, but in a sense we need to turn those into specifics and who's going to do what. And that's how we're kind of going to finish out the meeting between Skylie and I. So the idea is that I'm going to give you essentially, I guess, what I'll call the more technical aspects of the project and where we go. And Skylar's going to give you more of the, in a sense, the outreach products, how we link out to the funders, how we link out to the clients of this kind of information. But in the context of kind of setting the stage before I get negative of all the things that we have yet to do, Gretchen and I said it would be good for both of us to give you the thoughts of what's been positive. And I hearken back to 2.5 years ago when I was getting a phone call about every other day from Diane going, how can we bring this stuff together? How can we put together a workshop? And we held a workshop where we weren't even CCAN yet. It was simply the idea of, you know, we have as hatcheries or shellfish industry this issue, and we're not quite sure, and we don't know how to engage the community. And we ended up trying to put together a group that included 3 types of people. The first is I guess what I'll call the ocean chemists. And it's people like Andrew and people like Dick who do the ocean chemistry measurements, the carbon chemistry measures. The second would be the people, the biologists, who are looking at laboratory exposure. And Gretchen was a perfect example of somebody who fit in that category. And then the third was the people who are doing the biological measurements, be it the hatcheries or people like Steve Schroeder who are doing trends measurements. And the idea was we have to put all 3 of those together. And that workshop turned out to be pretty darn good. We ended up realizing that we wanted to put chemistry data together with biological data, but we ran into 3 problems. One is that the data was spatially disassociated, and in fact it was kind of interesting. I think Dick made a very nice comment at the meeting. He said, you know, I've for years been working on spatial scales that are global and temporal scales that are decadal, and I never realized the clientele that we had that had a spatial scale of my small estuary, and I need a decision about what's going to happen tomorrow or the day after. And so it caused people to start thinking at kind of a different scale. And again, that kind of goes to the temporal. And then from a quality perspective, you had people who were starting to make these measurements, but they weren't making them at the same level of quality. So the ability to link, you know, what people were doing on moorings a couple of miles offshore with what people were doing in the estuaries just wasn't there. And then, of course, it even goes beyond that, even the people who were doing the measurements at the higher levels of resolution. So the idea was to form CCAN, and that's what we ended up with out of that meeting. And I would put forward to you that we have had a lot of successes. I'll start by saying I found it very interesting 2 years ago. Those of you at the meeting, I remember people were introducing themselves. It was the first time that many of you all had met. And I'm impressed by how everybody now knows each other, writing, in a sense, proposals together, speaking common languages together. I actually was very impressed by, where's Alan, his introductory talk. And he basically said, I don't want to be a scientist, I don't want to write any more papers, but then went on to talk at the level that's well beyond what most scientists would be able to talk. And I also look back at things like, you know, we're talking about Durafet sensors now, like they're a standard. 2 years ago, look where they were, and kind of how we as a community have kind of advanced how we go about measure some of these things. I think there's also, you know, she used the word community. I think that's a great word. I see people working together, and more importantly, people are showing up at these meetings and working together. And I'll also say that I think that one of the nice things is that we've used this to draw the attention. I mean, you're seeing those articles that are showing up in, where was the thing, Jen, after was that in Science, the thing that came up after the workshop that we held in Seattle? There was an article in Science.
Nature.
Was it Nature? Okay.
Nature.
You know, about ocean acidification, and it was using a lot of what's coming out of here. I'll tell you that that's plain. Obviously, you all are aware what's happening in the Washington Blue Ribbon panel. There's some things that are starting to happen in California. We certainly have the attention of NOAA. I mean, this is one of these things that if you look back, you know, if the shellfish growers go by themselves and say, I think I have an ocean acidification problem, the level of credibility they're going to get is not as high. If the scientists go by themselves and simply say, hey, this is an issue, then it looks like they're just looking for more funding for their research. The two going together really draws the attention. I'm very impressed by where, you know, 2 years ago it was, we think it maybe isn't Vibrios, we think it might be ocean acidification, and now we're having articles, you know, and things like, you know, Gretchen just talked about, where this is becoming a story, and groups like Jane Lubchenco at NOAA see it as this is the way for me to sell where I want to go with ocean acidification, because it's not just scientists, it's industry as well. So I think it's, that's a tremendous success. There have also been some technical successes. I mean, we almost take it for granted right now that we have found a commonality, that saturation state is the thing we all want to measure, and we all want to measure it with some level of commonality. When you go back 2 years ago, you had people talking about pH measurements, all right? We've agreed, all right? I think we've agreed that that's our common currency. Whether you're a biologist or whether you're a chemist, we all need that to ultimately tie back into the biology. And we even talked about point 2. I think there's agreement on that, but we're getting pretty close. We also agreed about the desirability to co-locate biology and chemical measurements, that you look at how much more of that is being done. In fact, I always ask myself the question, so who did something differently as a result of this meeting, all right? And I look back 2 years, and I look at how many people are doing things different. We just had the example of Tessa and Terry doing things differently. We just had an example of researchers writing proposals together differently than they would. I think that's a tremendous compliment to the kind of things that have occurred. Okay, now the part I was asked to talk about, the but. So this is all good, but we have this thing that's a very loose network. We've agreed on concepts. We've agreed that we want to work together, but we have a lot of details left. And so again, I'm going to harken back to where we were a year ago when we talked about what we wanted to achieve. And what we said is that we have 3 levels, back then, this is the meeting we had back then, we had 3 levels of data providers that we wanted to entrain into the system. One level was the Seattle Aquarium. Right. Again, this is not necessarily the levels that we're agreeing on now, but this is what we talked about back then. The level of the Seattle Aquarium, where you have a group that is not into ocean chemistry, right, but doesn't mind making some measurements. They're not going to put big bucks into it. They're not going to do it at some 6 decimal point level, but they can provide a tremendous service because they have a constant stream and constant set of measurements. How do we get them to play? The second group that we brought up, in fact, it's Pleschner-Steele specifically. He was at the meeting a year ago. He's at this meeting now. He's an NPDES discharger, okay? He has a water quality monitoring program. He goes out and leads a group of, what is it, like 4 or 5 ships go out for 3 days in a row and cover entire Southern California bight with, what, several hundred stations? Several hundred stations that they all do. What's that?
And it's done 4 times a year.
4 times, so quarterly, 4 times a year, several hundred stations, and they're willing to put sensors on to take these ocean acidification measurements. It's not what they're regulated on, but they recognize that that's information they have, that's essentially background information, in the same way that they have to look at El Nino effects and temperature and how the background conditions are changing. They need to look at how this is changing. And I will tell you, besides Alex's interest, there's interest at the highest levels within his management and within the regulatory agencies that they report to. Because they look at this as something that is worthwhile to do, and they're level up from the Seattle Aquarium because they are professional oceanographers who go out and take continuous measurements. And they have a little bit more money to do something like this. So it may be a little bit more expensive sensor. A $5,000 sensor probably isn't going to scare them the same way it might an aquarium. So that was our second level. 5,000 would? No, it wouldn't. And then the third level was essentially the high-end researcher, and this is, the people, like Dick, who won it at the 6th decimal place. And the idea was, how do we bring all of those together? And more importantly, how do we provide the level of guidance for those other 2 levels that aren't presently taking the measurements, so that they can get to the point that people like Dick could be using those measurements as part of a larger thing, or people like the hatcheries. And of course, the hatcheries would probably fall in level 1 or 2, kind of depending on the level of expertise. And I would put forward to you that that was a good goal, and we haven't yet achieved it. I think there's a lot of things that we have progressed on, but if I were to put myself in Alex's position and say, so damn it, what instrument do I buy, and how do I calibrate it, and how do I store the data? He can't do it. And until we give him that level, he's not going to do it. Okay? But I think he's willing to do it. I'll give you an example of another thing that's coming up, another type of group that we have a good opportunity with. I'm hosting on October 11th and 12th a meeting of something called WAML, the West Coast Association of Marine Laboratories. It's the directors of all the West Coast laboratories. Most of them have flow-through seawater systems, right? And one of the items that we specifically have on that agenda is how do we develop an ocean acidification monitoring network out of those intakes? Of course, we have aquariums that are in the same boat, right? Andrew's coming up to that meeting. He's got a few hours on that agenda. There is interest among the West Coast directors to essentially, they're already monitoring for temperature and salinity and oxygen. There's interest in adding this in, but we're not yet at the point of telling them how to do it. And I promise you, as a lab director, all right, I may be a scientist, but you ask me to do it, and I'm no better off than Alex is. In fact, he's probably better off than I am, all right? I mean, I know that there's a Durafed sensor, okay? But, calibrating it, and then what else am I going to combine with it, all right? The level of guidance, we're just not there yet. Sorry. The one I was going back to is there are also a couple of areas where we have core concepts, but we really haven't fully developed the ideas. I think with the measurement, we're farther along. For measurement for aragonite saturation state, we're farther along. I think we're not quite there for the biological measurements, and we're not there yet for the data management. So I'll also suggest to you that we need a network management strategy, all right? This grant is about to end. When it ends, okay, we've had Andrew in a leadership role. Andrew's made it very clear that he was willing to lead us through this part, but he got a going away gift, and we need to figure out how this is going to keep up. In addition, we had people who would pay for us to come, pay for travel, to come to this meeting, to come to the 2 or 3 or 4 other meetings that we've had on this. How are we going to keep that momentum going? In addition, even if we can develop the consistency of measurements, all right, and can take that stuff and get it out, who is going to be responsible for transmitting it to people, all right? And those people could come in the form of modelers. Essentially what you want to do is you want to get to the point of being able to use this to develop predictions, all right? You don't want to just, monitor, you want to be able to predict. You need modelers to do that, to take essentially the offshore information, integrate it with the nearshore information. Who's going to be the facilitator of that? And then who's going to be the group that then takes this information and gets it out to the right parties? We need to develop that. So in a sense, what I'm trying to do here is establish the needs so that as I move into the next part, we can start to talk about how we're going to solve them. So with that, I'm going to go through and give you some slides on technical guidance needs, the things that I think we need to walk out of here with action items. I think the idea is this session was supposed to continue after lunch, so I think what we'll do is we'll just kind of get started with this, and we'll go as far as we can, and we'll probably just take a break at some point and then come back after lunch. So I'm going to give you 3 or 4 slides on how I think we get from here to there. So, and they're going to come in 4 categories. When we talked about what we wanted to define out of this program, we said we want to identify what parameters to measure and what instruments to use in order to do it. In other words, that guidance manual of, what does a guy like Alex do? We identified that we wanted to talk about where we're going to measure. In other words, what does the network look like? Where do we measure, in a sense, a network design? We identified that we wanted the training and quality assurance steps to ensure the data truly are comparable among groups. And we need to figure out what to do with the data once it's collected. So this is the 4 I'm going to lead you through. And I'll start with the first one. Which parameters to measure? And I think we're actually not in bad shape on this. We're not where we need to be. I don't have that how-to manual. On the other hand, I think if you kind of looked at what Andrew put up there with the advantages and disadvantages, it started to become relatively clear about what our options are. And I think that Andrew wasn't giving his opinion. He was giving the summary of all of the interactions that happened at these subcommittee meetings. Again, and as you say, I wrote at least for saturation state. The second thing, I think, is that out of the dialogue, I've seen the definitions changed. I gave you, in a sense, the the 3 that we talked about at the last meeting. And I think what's happened is that people have realized that I kind of gave it to you on 3 levels of expertise. And I think what's happened is essentially the defined needs have changed a little bit. There's people who want to do weather measurements versus people who need to do climate measurements. And so you need different levels of consistency across that. People who do it continuous versus static. People who do it estuary versus ocean. I'm not even sure those are the final ones, but those are the ones that have certainly been discussed. And what somebody said is it's not a single methods manual. It's a series of multiple pieces of advice. And so we need to develop that for each of the different types of users, each of the different types of circumstances. And, I think we're at the point where it's pretty close to knowing what to recommend. The difficulty is that it's not on paper. And in fact, I'm going to go one step further. We've had a great guy in Andrew leading us, but he's just a nice guy. All right? He said it before, I don't like to tell people what to do. All right? What we need is, for want of a better word, an arrogant asshole who doesn't mind stepping up and saying, that is the right way to do it. Okay? You need somebody who's going to do that. And I think what it is I think it's a group. I think what it is, it's a committee that gets together with the very defined goal of, we're going to put it on paper, we'll float it to the rest of the group, but we need, that kind of thing. Somebody says, that is the way we're going to, and it's not like it won't change into time. You see, at the end, I put the biological measurements. Let me come back to that one later, because I think that one's it's a whole other trajectory. From a network design perspective, I'm going to suggest to you that we pass on network design. All right. Again, I'm going to walk through these, and then what we're going to do is I'm going to roll back and we're going to revisit each one with the goal of making assignments out of this. For network design, I'm going to suggest, though, that there aren't any assignments. And I think the reason for that is this is a kind of a unique effort. There isn't funding that's coming to support the data collection effort. And so it's real hard to say, let's go put a buoy there, let's go do a continuous measurement. It's going to be a little bit haphazard at the beginning. I think the effort we want to put is not into designing what we'd like it to be, because I don't think we have the resources to do that, but to put it in how do we take the efforts that are already there and get them coordinated, and then how do we essentially bring in the new partners who are sitting out there waiting to join once we define it.
Well, maybe you just call it something different. Why don't you call it network description?
I think that might be
something like that, because you do want to say clearly what it is now based on what CCAN has put together.
I think that's a great idea. So let me run through these, Dick, and we'll come back and we'll talk about each one of these individually, because I think each one of these is going to be a half-hour discussion to kind of get to an endpoint. Training and quality assurance. I think this is one of the biggest areas of opportunity. And in a lot of ways, we're in good shape. I mean, Andrew talked about the amount of water he shipped out. Jason talked about the relationships he's had with NIST, getting them into the game to the point that maybe they can send out the kind of things that Alan was asking for. But we kind of need to flesh that out a little bit further. And in fact, I will suggest to you that the things that are in place right now are really more oriented around the experienced user rather than around the new user. So we need to work in that area. Second thing is that one of the things that we talked about is a lot of hands-on, all right, training, that kind of thing, and maybe the idea of doing a video. And as it turns out, we were able to get a little bit of money out of the State Water Board. I think that money showed up for you. Did it show up for you? Okay. And I think one of the things they talked with you about is the potential of doing a video. They didn't? Okay. Well, we could get them. If video is what we want to do, we might be able to get them to program the money for that. Anyway, so there are opportunities that exist right now for us to do something. We need to talk about how, what are those products we want. But I'm going to suggest the biggest one is the kind of thing that people were talking about before. I wrote these slides early this morning before we ever had this session, but I think it's an adoption program. I think what you need is somebody in each of a series of regions who is the trainer. They're the group that essentially, if you work in that area, you go, and then maybe you identify 4 or 5 regions, and that those people all coordinate amongst each other, but they become the trainers for everybody else. They become a lot of the QA for everybody else. So again, we'll come back and we'll talk about that as a possibility. And the last part is who collates the data. And it's a lot more than collating the data. It is defining the data structures. It is defining the metadata requirements that go with it. It is defining how you're going to visualize and transmit that information in a meaningful way, because you have a lot of, and I would suggest to you that the easy part about this one is I don't think there's anybody in the room who's going to argue that it's the oozes that do it. They've already started to step up to the plate. But again, we need to figure out how to get from the generalities of where we're at to some of the specifics. And Jen was starting to identify some of that before we left. So anyway, these are in the area, I guess what I'll call almost the technical areas. Skylar's going to deal later with the outreach areas. I think these are the topics that we need to talk about. So what I'd like to do in terms of organizing the session is to first start off by saying, those are the 4 technical areas I want to talk about, with the idea of leaving here with some assignments to move us forward. Right? Are these the right topic areas before we start to talk about how we'll do them?
Can you just set us in the right direction? Are you envisioning this to be what we have for the final report for this particular contract, or is this the way forward for the next steps? I'm unclear as to what this whole overall vision is about.
I'm looking, in my idea, I'm looking past the contract. I'm looking at this as how do we take CCAN to the next level? If we happen to do it in the tenure of the contract, that's fine, but I'm looking at...
Can we define what we can do here as part of the final contract so we have a clear understanding of that? I mean, there are components of this presumably has to be part of the final contract report, and I envision this to be much farther than that. So if we could, at least in the process of going through these steps, kind of delineate that, that might be helpful.
That would be a good thing to do. But bottom line, Dick, is I'm looking at this as not the Moore Foundation contract, but I'm looking at this as how do we move CCAN
Yeah, I
beyond.
just want to know where our vision is for where else to move CCAN forward from where we are.
Anyway, after hearing me go on, are these the right 4 areas for us to talk about? Are there other areas that I didn't cover? Okay, hearing none. Let's talk about this. People looked at me aghast when I used the word arrogant asshole, but we really do need somebody who's going to step up and say, this is the way we should do it. And it's not one individual, but it's one individual who has to say, I'm willing to take the first cut at putting that on paper. And then a small committee of people who probably the ones attended the committee meeting about methodology and QA, who would then review that before it goes out to the larger group for agreement. So, I'm going to look around. Does anybody want to step up and take a leadership role in this?
Steve?
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, you want me to do it? I am the single least qualified person. I'm the one, remember I said, who wouldn't know how to do it. You need somebody who's close enough to it that they can do it. All right, so I'm going to put this in context of the question that Dick asked. Andrew, is this something that you felt is a deliverable of the contract or not? And is there any money left in the contract to give somebody some small amount of money to do this?
I think that articulating clearly the piece you have there at the top is an appropriate piece of what we're doing as a consequence of these workshops. The degree of trouble it would be to do what you have there in the 3rd bullet far extends, in my mind, significantly beyond where it would be appropriate to imagine getting it done in the funding and time available on this. So I would be prepared to write clearly what I had spoken about earlier yesterday based on part 1. But I think having myself been involved in preparing a Guide to Best Practices Manual for CO2 measurements for the ocean CO2 community, I know that that took 4 weeks of my time after everybody else thought they had done it.
So
In
do you see
addition
that-
to the time then.
All right, so let's take it out of the realm of the contract. Do you see this as a logical next step? Do you think this is a product that we should be producing?
I believe it is, because I think that what you articulated and identified there, that the level of new data providers who want to engage is absolutely key for this. If this is going to get done, it's going to get done because a lot of people want to know this information and are doing it in a way that working as a community gains more than individuals simply trying to teach themselves about it. There will be people that try to teach themselves, but many people, probably some of them in the room, can comment on just how hard that really is at present. I think it's very valuable.
I mean, to me, this seems like an obvious product, and it seems like we're not all that far from it. And it seems like that we could identify, I guess I'll call it 2 users that we write these manuals for, all right? The 2 I'm giving you as examples are whether you do it as the Seattle Aquarium or whether you do it as the Western Association of Marine Laboratories, you know, where you have essentially research labs that have flow-through seawater systems. We write a manual for them and say, if you want to become part of this network, here's what you do. Because in the end, I think there's going to be a manpower cost, but I think the instrumentation cost is, I don't know, less than $10,000. You're going to find groups that want to do it. The second group would be somebody like Alex, and he's got a CTD instrument that he pops down at several hundred places. Tell them what to measure. Tell them how to calibrate.
Just a thought, and I think you might know about this more than anybody, Steve, but dischargers, when they're fined, need to, sometimes they come up with a SEP. And I think that we can also create opportunities for putting sensors on outfalls to be a supplemental environmental project. You know
Well,
what I mean?
what that
would be
goes to
funded.
is essentially a method of developing funding to do it. I guess the question is, I'm looking at within this group, you know,
Should we be doing it?
maybe the answer is, if I gave you $100,000, who'd write this document? Maybe I get a whole bunch of hands, and maybe that's the issue. In which case, if that is truly the end point, then what you're telling me is the action item here is to go get funding to do this. I put forward to you, I don't think this step is a funding-based step. I think this is just an assignment-based step. I think there are a bunch of things that are going to be funding-based steps. I think this one is not. But it does require somebody to say, yeah, we need this enough that I'm willing to do it. So, is there anybody here named Jason who would like to do this?
Yes, I will gladly assist with this in terms of helping push forward the table of instrumentation, our ACT evaluation process. We've just finished a round of evaluating in the field in a variety of environments, and PCO2 sensors that are commercially available. And so we do have experience with that, as well as a lot of the reference analytical techniques with pretty high precision, not approaching the expert labs, but not that far off. So we can provide input from our experience, hopefully can provide input to some of the reference sampling methods as well, in terms of our experience with that, how to co-locate water samples as efficiently as possible with the sensor surfaces. And I think through our ongoing pH verification studies, sensor verification studies, we'll get a much better handle on calibration procedures for some of these sensors as well. So that'll be a little bit longer term, but I think with the protocols we're developing with the help of a lot of the people in this room, that can feed directly into these types of documents that are, I think, a needed outcome from the CCAN efforts.
the risk of being an arrogant asshole, I'm going to ask the question. A year ago, we did have some subcommittees who set off to do some of this work, and I don't know whether anything got produced. I think Terry King said she was going to try to, but I don't want this stuff to get lost, because it feels to me like I'm a little bit on a Groundhog's Day, and I just want to make sure that we capture that and either say things have changed in a year, or let's use this to go forward, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Right, and my vision was not that we would start from scratch. It would be exactly that. We build off of these workshops that have already occurred. We just need to bring them to completion so that we can hand somebody a document and say, here, Alex, if you want to do it, this is what you do to move forward. So, Andrew?
The level of discussion at the subcommittees that I participated in, and of which I'm aware generally, is very much identifying the advantages and disadvantages of various approaches, indicating which ones are commercially available, which ones you would have to do a home brew kit, which you may or may not be able to get a recipe for. My experience when we did the original DOE manual for open ocean measurements is that occasionally there was a lab that had a method they were prepared to share. We rewrote those methods, and then we sent them around to people to comment on them, and then we rewrote them again. That happened substantially because I had significant funding from the Department of Energy to lead that activity and make it happen. Having it happen evenings and weekends is not going to happen. So I think we can take where we are now and write the table of contents with good agreement, but writing the chapters that make up this mythical tome, I think requires actual money to get people to recognize that this, for some period of their life, is their priority.
So okay, so that brings us to two paths in the road. Path number one is we could say, at this point, CCAN is not focused on bringing new providers in because we're not at the point of being able to train those folks and kind of give them some standardization. And so what we're going to do is focus on essentially the QA activities and data sharing activities of the people who are already in this room. Second possibility is we say, no, we are going to go ahead with this, and we find, in a sense, the resources to do it, or the people who are willing to step up. And one of the reasons I jokingly picked on Jason is because I'm chairman of his board, and therefore I can motivate him to do these kind of things. But I think, I honestly, I look at Jason, I go, that's actually a very good choice because he has enough knowledge to get this done, but he's not the authority on the topic. So he's not going to get too lost in all the details. He's really going to focus on what that product is, and that will stimulate people like you and others to comment on it and to help him essentially bring it to that next level without you having to do all the work. And I think within his organization, I think this fits pretty well within the mandate of things that they're trying to do, is move sensors, from the drawing board into application.
Steve, I'm just wondering, in everything that I'm hearing in this conversation, is there an action item that's a very useful middle ground for us that, for example, might be a statement that goes on our poster that's going to the Monterey meeting or something that says, roughly, given the technical environment with sensors and the vagaries of chemistry, et cetera, CCAN recommends X, or we feel like we can get behind the importance of developing pH standards, et cetera, but then we can still pursue some real activities that are important to us, like maybe having training workshops. But if we could come up with a solid statement, that would at least be something that goes in the report to more, that becomes part of our view of the world right now. So it would be really neat if we could get text from this group at this meeting.
So I don't think that's a bad thing to do. I think actually one of the things you and I talked about is maybe one of the things we do is we close out this meeting with what is it that we would actually want to say on a poster at the High CO2 conference, that what is, where is CCAN going? I think this one, though, is more definitive. I think when we held the meeting last year, we said that we wanted to entrain new users. And in order to do that, we need to define things or train them to get them to become part of it. We wanted to build a bigger network because our data density right now is pretty darn small. And in order to understand across a variety of geographies and a variety of salinities, and we need to entrain those other groups.
Right, and I'm not disagreeing with that, but I'm saying that, you know, science and everything is incremental, you know, and we're all volunteers here and we're patching it together. So maybe the next incremental step is we've come really far and together we've identified, you know, a part of the game board that, you know, we might not be able to afford, as Andrew said, you know, that's a huge effort, but at least we can identify real priorities in what we think, given our experience.
Well, that's exactly the question in front of the group. We could go the route of bringing in and training new users is not that important to us. We could go the route of we'll do it, but only where we could find a local mentor who's going to train them, and we're not going to do it as a network, we're going to do it as a series of individuals. Or we can go the route of what I'm suggesting that we do, is we actually try and capture that. So let me turn to Jason, since he volunteered. I don't know whether you volunteered because I called on your name, or whether you volunteered because you really think you have the time and energy to do this.
Yes, definitely have the time and the energy for the most part, but our ACT program has moved to a more theme-based long-term activity plan. Of course, we're following on from our PCO2 efforts. We're now into pH and other aspects of carbonate chemistry in the ocean. So it's a very valid justification of my time that I am paid on the ACT program to help at least assimilate some of this data. As comments have been made at other board meetings that I'm not essentially the arrogant asshole, but I can keep on practicing at being that. And I just wanted to say that, yes, he cut my teeth on my first workshop. But no, I think we've, just from, I guess it was last summer's meeting, made, I think, really valuable steps in terms of guiding training and development of coastal manual development in terms of, it seems like there's a consensus to move towards a weather level of uncertainty in our measurements, and even just defining whether it's biologically relevant or not, the plus or minus 0.2 uncertainty in the omega for aragonite value, I think gives fairly well-defined training goals that maybe we can modify the big Bible of carbonate chemistry to get down to release some of the constraints there to levels that the coastal users could make use of. So I think there are targets that can be made, maybe in terms of training, just as a certification type of level that, whatever parameter people are measuring, because, again, not everyone's going to be able to measure all 4 or even 2 of them. It seems there's a lot of emphasis being put out just getting pH right in the variety of locales, and training people to do reference sampling to the level of precision that's needed to get to that plus or minus 2 as a defensible.
So let's come back to the training part later, because that's a subsequent part. I'm just thinking right now, again, I'm trying to give the specific. We've got this WAML meeting. I think it would be a tremendous coup for CCAN if we got half a dozen labs that have continuous flow-through systems in this Western Association of Marine Labs, which includes Alaska, which includes Hawaii, which includes Guam, which includes French Polynesia, as well as up and down the Oregon and Hawaii. If we could get half a dozen of those labs to buy into, we're all going to put this kind of stuff out into our system. But in order to do that, we need to walk in and say, this is what we want you to do. And I guess the question, I'm going to look at Andrew, because you're the one who's on on the dime to come on October 12th and October 13th, yes. Yeah, that's right, you're on the 13th. I'm not seeing a lot of comfort in your face. Is that because you don't think we can get there? Is that because you think Jason's the wrong guy to do it? Is that because you don't think this is worth the effort? We should put things elsewhere?
I think this is very much worth the effort. It's definitely, I think, a way that would move this forward. I don't believe we're in a situation at this time to say, if you bought, to pick an exact example, a CFET from Setlantic, this is how you should use it. We know that because lots of other people have used it this way and it works. We're not in a situation to say that yet. Partly because it's never been written down, so people don't even know whether they're doing it the same way. Second, they don't know which way works best. So I think that we really have to do this, but that we're not at the situation now that you can say, oh, well, we'll just take the already written description and modify it. I think it's sufficiently different and sufficiently important, you're starting again.
How do others feel? Starting with, do you think this is a worthwhile activity? And then second, do you think we're going to be successful?
I'm going to echo Andrew's words and say it's a hugely worthwhile activity, but it might just be one step further down the road than we're prepared to be. My laboratory, Paul Mattson and Pauline, have been sort of some of the beta testers of the CFETs, the Durafet units built by Todd Merritt's, and there is no operating manual, and it's very difficult. Francis and I work together using other sensors, and I'd have to say it would be, I think the word I'm looking for is impossible for me to go to an entity that you're describing and saying, here's how it works, without bringing everybody our computers and spending a week trying to explain it. And Andrew and I had this conversation offline, but one possibility that we might even have a crumb of money to support as a CCAN effort is to try to put some of these things into a video, into some sort of instructional situation. I actually nominated Paul Mattson as our leading man. He looks great on camera. And it was just a thought, because we do have a small amount of money, and Andrew's films were made while he gave lectures on ocean acidification, and we filmed them using some of our University of California ocean acidification, ocean change money, and they've been shown and used, and they've been quite useful. They weren't terribly expensive, so I think this is a beautiful direction for us to go, but personally, I don't think we're ready to teach those groups. I don't know if anybody else has a feeling about that, who's used these instruments, or I don't feel like I'm prepared to distribute them widely. We could show one group how to use them, but then it would come at huge cost to us personally to go to 6 or 7 entities. Ideas, anybody?
How do others feel? I mean, one of the reasons I started with the WAML group is because it's a bunch of scientists as opposed to a bunch of aquaria, you know, so it might be easier. But if we don't even think we can do that, then that's an important statement for us to make, and then to recognize that our mission really is less about attracting new folks and more about standardizing how we, who are already doing it.
Well, that's just my personal opinion. It's not impossible, but we don't have the teaching tools yet, in my very humble opinion.
So, you know, we could beta test our ability to teach others how to do these things by just trying to teach the others sitting in this room. And I've heard from a number of people that they need to just know how to make better measurements, you know, and seems like that's a core mission of CCAN anyhow. So I guess it does come before involving other groups, but wouldn't be hard to do.
So let's take one or two. The idea was we're going to get this started, and then the beauty is this will be a fun place to stop as we go to lunch and then come back from lunch and try and make a decision. We had 1 or 2 other people with their hands up. So, Kylie?
Well, I thought I heard an offer on the table. I just didn't want us to roll over that. I mean, I think that if we're talking about advancing the idea that there seems to be some consensus on is really critically important, but whether it's a giant step or a baby step, I heard an offer on the table that I, for one, want to make a motion that we take you up on that.
And she's pointing.
I'll say we'll try, because we have the expertise. We know how to work with the film production crew. So we could try. We could come up with a trailer, how about, and screen it at our next meeting.
I think the key in this is that we have to work to have documented information, stuff written down, training, telling people about it. We've had a lot of practice at that, but it ends up as a game of Chinese whispers if we don't start with things properly written down. And I think that having had some work at writing this down, that is a non-trivial thing. Those people that do video professionally would point out that it's double the trouble there, because first you write it down, and then you decide how you can make a film out of it. So that too is not an immediate minor point.
So, well, the beauty is, I know that Andrew wanted to break for lunch about now, and this is actually a great stopping point, because this really is a bit of a fork in the road for us. We have in 2 months, on October 13th, Andrew on the agenda to talk to the WAML, Western Associated Marine Labs directors, and their question is, if we want to form a network of laboratories with continuous seawater systems, how would we do it? And I think we need to figure out as a group what we want to say to them, and that could be, we're not ready for you, come back in a year, and WAML holds annual meetings. It could be, we're ready for you on a pilot basis, we want to work with 1 or 2 of you. It could be, and here's what we'd really all like you to do. We need to figure that out, because that's coming up in 2 months. And again, I'm not married to any one of those, but I think that's the kind of decision we need to make. So my suggestion is we take a break for lunch, we come back, and when we come back from lunch, we'll pick up, hopefully there'll be a couple of people who have some ideas. Just so you know, when we get done with that topic, I'm going to push you on all the others.
So just a quick note to people, for travel reimbursements, Bev Kennedy has informed me that she will email each of you individually from our attendee list, and will conduct individual negotiations with you to make sure she has the appropriate documentation and information that she needs to make sure you get the check that you need.
Can you impress on her that we need to get the checks before the end of August? Which is in September.
The sooner you start it, the sooner the University of California will do it. This is the University of California, famous for its size and thus perhaps the ponderous nature in which it can achieve things. Impressing it on Bev is irrelevant. Impressing it on our fiscal system is impossible. Start soon.
And on a different subject too, Steve, you're referring to October as a deadline. We also have, in late September, we're supposed to be doing a poster at Oceans in a High CO2 World that Andrew's going to staff. So we need something for the poster.
Right, and that's what Gretchen was bringing up. I think that's actually how Gretchen wanted to finish the meeting, was talking about what we're going to put on that poster. So, anyway, lunch is over there, ready?
Lunch, I presume, is outside.
And what time do you want them back? Because I think it said 1:45 on your schedule.
Yeah, I think
And I don't think you want 1:45, do you?
that's an hour and a half from now. Let's go for 1:30.